Good evening and welcome to the Got Ancient Wisdom live stream, where we're continuing reading Stan Gooch's first proper solo work, Total Man, which is from 1972. So we're actually on episode 10 of this now, which is, I think we're in the third part of the book. Yeah, part 3, trance and anti-trance. And we're actually we finished chapter 6 last week, which was the longest chapter, I think, of the book. Quite detailed, goes into a lot of information about the political origins or the origins of political choice, and why they come from a biological. They have a biological origin in two parts of the mind that are linked to the muscle and the viscera. So it's quite that. I think last week is one of the most detailed chapters of the book, really, and it might take a bit of rereading again or listening to again to fully comprehend what Gooch is actually saying in that chapter. Because he doesn't, he sort of, the rest of his work, he takes it as a sort of given that you understand that chapter. And it's, I didn't mention last week, actually, that it's similar to the RK selection theory, which was popular about 5 or 6 years ago, which states that people on the left are K selected, maybe? I can't remember the exact details of it, but the R selected is one type of mating preference or selection preference, and the way that an animal either mates, has offspring, or looks after its offspring. And then K selected is a different type. So one could be that they invest a lot of time in their young, and the other type is that they don't invest any time at all in their young. So rabbits, for example, don't really invest much time in their young. They grow up pretty quick, and rabbits can also procreate really fast. And whereas other animals may have one offspring, invest a lot of time in it. Elephants, say, that they have a 2-year gestation period, and they take about 11 years or something before they're fully matured and able to be an elephant. In the chat we've got NA Theory. Hi, the only way out is in. Hello. And Ralph Hexam, hello to you, sir. Ralph Hexam saying RK theory does make sense, though. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think if you look back at the last, I did mean to mention, it's only after we finished the chapter that I thought, oh bollocks, I forgot to talk about RK selection theory. But I think it does tie in with that last chapter, with chapter 6, in the that these things are political. Political is biological as well. And the unique feature of humans is that they are both R and K selective. So there's no other animals that really do that, which again hints at our hybrid origin. What else have we had this week? Just boring normal news stuff about wars and things like that, which we're not going to concern ourselves with So, if it's all right with you lot, I'll just get on with chapter 7. The bookmark from The Only Way Out is in. Okay, so chapter 7, the nature of consciousness. The phenomenon of consciousness, without which life as we know it is not life, and solely in terms of which we exist and can know we exist, is itself denied existence by the experimental psychologist. One could hardly find better words to refute that refutation than those of R.D. Laing. The experience of oneself and others as persons is primary and self-validating. It exists prior to the scientific or philosophical difficulties about how such existence is possible or how it is to be explained. The experimental psychologist who speaks of consciousness as a hypothetical construct or as a reference without a referent secretly understands perfectly well what is being referred to by the term. Though he denies it, as perhaps Peter denied Christ, he reveals his true position when he discusses eagerly, as he readily will, the possibilities of developing computers which possess consciousness. In other words, he is fully prepared to accept the concept whose existence a moment before he refused to acknowledge, provided we are talking only of assigning it to a machine. When one asks how we would know if the machine had consciousness, he replies, because the machine would report that it had. We have the position then that if a computer says it has consciousness, one accepts the statement. But when a human being makes the same claim, one does not. This is behaviour which, in another situation, we might call psychotic. If one is to discuss consciousness, the problem of definition would seem to arise. Actually, it does not arise. There are two circumstances under which definition is necessary. One, when the person one is addressing has never seen or experienced whatever is being talked about, and when therefore some attempt must be made to convey to him what is under discussion, and 2, when it becomes clear in the course of discussion that two individuals in fact understand different things by an apparently common term. There would thus be no a priori call to define, say, the terms tree, shoe, or room, though it is a very, very salutary exercise to attempt to define such everyday objects to someone else's satisfaction, or even to one's own. I am here prepared to work with whatever the reader himself understands by the term consciousness or self-aware, providing only that he does not deny the existence of consciousness. The proposition, I think, therefore I am not, is a little too ridiculous. Yet the psychotic does almost achieve this. Far from any attempt to define consciousness, then, it is proposed now that an understanding of the totality of human behaviour and of personality is possible only in the context of at least two different forms of consciousness. There are two possible formulations of this position, and as in physics in respect of the particle and wave theories of light, both account well for some of the observed phenomena. For this reason, both must be retained for the present. The proposals are 1. That consciousness is migratory and capable of movement to another site or sphere of activity within the nervous system, where it takes on characteristics other than those in evidence at the prior location, and 2. That two quite separate forms of consciousness exist within each of us, governed, however, by a mechanism resembling an alternating switch, so that whenever one form is on, the other is automatically off. These proposals are discussed separately. Subsequently, the physiology of the brain is reconsidered, where it is shown that the psychological picture outlined in this book matches up very well indeed with certain established but not fully understood aspects of experimental physiology. 1. The concept of moving consciousness. The evidence for the view of consciousness now suggested is so vast and so ramified that it is difficult to know where to begin. Possibly the best starting point is with children and certain poets, since as children we experience this condition in an extremely vivid, direct way, which we seem to lose later. However, the notion is recalled for us as adults both in poetry and literature. Children commonly believe that when they sleep they go on a journey. In this they concur, as it happens with the views of many Eastern religions and philosophies on the nature of sleep. A song made popular by a group called The Seekers, remember this is 1972, In recent years, Morningtown Ride incorporates one well-established idea of this kind. The song is addressed to children going to bed at night and has as its central concept the boarding of a train with the refrain, "Hear the whistle blowing out along the bay, all abound for Morningtown many miles away." The example may seem trivial. In these areas, however, the trivial examples are frequently and actually the most important, since they are permitted to escape from the unconscious into consciousness, as perhaps Odysseus and his companions, clinging to harmless sheep, were able to slip past Cyclops from the cave where he held them prisoner, without their being seen for what they are, vetted, analysed and destroyed. However, for a less trivial example, let us consider one of Dylan Thomas's most loved poems. The poet, operating as he does under licence, is allowed to say what others may not, at the price, of course, of its not being admitted to mean anything. "And nightly under the simple stars, as I rolled to sleep, the owls were bearing the farm away. And then to awake, and the farm, like a wanderer white, with dew come back, the cock on his shoulder." Here in the second part, the poet speaks as if it were the farm which had been away. It is, of course, he who has left the farm in sleep and then returned later. One talks to young children too of the land of dreams, the land of nod, and similarly the land of make-believe, fairyland, and so on, as if these were places that actually existed somewhere. Many fairy stories and other magic tales involve and usually begin with a journey of one sort or another. These journeys are of many different kinds, being usually, however, a process of going into a cave, a secret passage, a forest, the mountains. Narrowness and difficulty are often prominent features of this entry. Sometimes the journey is merely across country. Even then, however, it may well involve passage over marshland, across a treacherous river, through dim valleys, canyons, and whatever. Only rarely does the journey involve movement upwards, as in Jack and the Beanstalk or The Wizard of Oz. Pilgrim's Progress too has an upward tendency, while incorporating all other features mentioned. This last is a reminder that the journey figures also in more serious and adult literature. Witness to the voyages of Odysseus, Perseus, and other Greek heroes, often, of course, to the underworld. Further, in adventures such as James Hilton's Lost Horizon, Conan Doyle's The Lost World, Jules Verne's Journey to the Centre of the Earth, and many other books with varying mixtures of the serious and the fantastic. The difficulty of the journey is almost always emphasised. The central characters return wiser, richer, possibly happier, but at all events changed. Let us not overlook here the journey of the Israelites from captivity to the Promised Land. Whether this journey actually occurred is, of course, immaterial. The appeal and vitality of the story lie almost certainly in the echoes it wakes within us. Is it a coincidence that LSD and marijuana-induced states, particularly the former, are called trips? Psychoanalysts see in many aspects of these journeys a return to the womb and a reliving of the painful, traumatic process of birth. Freud states that when we sleep each night, we are in fact returning to the womb, hence the fetal posture of the sleeper. Of course, when the room is warm, we sleep fully extended. Without wishing to say that the curled-up position has no Freudian overtones, the conservation dissipation of body heat offers perhaps a more likely explanation of sleeping curled or spread-eagled. This book can regard the Freudian womb journey only as one sub-description of a more generalised voyage. True it is that at the moment of birth, the dreaming embryo is roused for the first time to waking consciousness. Till then, it has experienced itself, if at all, in terms of some inner world, at once proprioceptively and interoceptively. The present book agrees that each night we re-experience a similar journey to that prior to birth, and undertake that it end a journey within our nervous system. In this sense, the concept of the return to the womb is accepted, but without necessarily the Freudian overtones of a search for protection and comfort. The physiological description of the various states of sleep will be recalled from Chapter 6, in particular, Figure 1. This is reproduced here in slightly altered form in Figure 11. Just get Figure 11. There you go. As discussed, paradoxical sleep may be considered in some senses nearer to waking consciousness and further removed from it in certain others. On the one hand, the cortex is active during the dreaming in a way that resembles consciousness. On the other hand, it is harder to arouse a person from dreaming sleep than from orthodox sleep. When a person is so roused or arouses himself, it is often with the dream still upon him, a state that may last only for moments or may persist throughout a whole day. Is it not as if waking consciousness has caught a closer than usual glimpse of some other arena of activity? In Figure 1, paradoxical sleep is now shown as a state further removed from normal consciousness than is orthodox sleep. A point of note is that the length of time spent in dreaming increases with each phase of dreaming. The first being of the order of 5 to 10 minutes, the last of 30 plus minutes, lasting possibly as much as 60 minutes. In this sense, we can say that a person becomes progressively more possessed by dreams as the night wears on. Figure 11 is one possible representation of the journey. Others, more precisely physiological, will be proposed at a later stage. Lang has a great deal to say on the subject of the journey, with naturally particular reference to psychotic breakdown. In chapter 7 of his book, The Politics of Experience, he gives verbatim an account given to him by a man who experienced a schizophrenic episode. The chapter is called A 10-Day Voyage. A brief extract from this follows. Suddenly I looked at the clock and the wireless was on and there was music playing. Popular sort of bit of music. It was based on the rhythm of a tram. Ta-ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta-ta, something like Ravel's repetitive tune. And then when this happened, I suddenly felt as if time was going back. I had this extraordinary feeling of, that was the greatest feeling I had at that moment, was of time going backwards. I even felt it so strongly I looked at the clock, and in some way I felt that the clock was reinforcing my own opinion of time going back, although I couldn't see the hands moving. I felt alarmed because I suddenly felt as if I was moving somewhere on a kind of conveyor belt and unable to do anything about it, as if I was slipping along and sliding down a chute, as it were, and unable to stop myself. On the question of one's relationship to time in the journey, more will be said at another point. Lang adds a number of comments of his own to this account, which occupies in all some 15 pages. The italics in the following extracts are his. We can no longer assume that such a voyage is an illness that has to be treated. Can we not see that this voyage is not what we need to be cured of, but that it is itself a natural way of healing our own appalling state of alienation called normality? In other times, people intentionally embarked upon this voyage, or if they found themselves already embarked willy-nilly, they gave thanks as for a special grace. Today, some people still set out, but perhaps the majority find themselves forced out of the normal world by being placed in an untenable position in it. They have no orientation in the geography of inner space and time, and are likely to get lost very quickly without a guide. In this particular type of journey, the direction we have to take is back and in. The link between the material quoted and some of the views of the book are hopefully clear. A final word on the general subject of the journey, in connection with the language of everyday experience. We speak, for instance, of being in love, and subsequently of falling out of love. In German, the phrase for the firmer state, verliebt, means away in love. A wealth of phrases connected with all kinds of mental states, apart from love, reflect the idea of movement in space. For example, out of this world, out of my mind, off my head, beside myself, way out, down to earth, back to reality, withdrawn, absent-minded. 2. The concept of dual consciousness. Hang on, let me just see if I've got transition back. There you go. In the experimental literature on sleep, a persistent denigration amounting to a dismissal can be observed not of the physiological substrata of dreaming, but of the subjective personal concomitants of dreaming, that is, of the dream experience. Literature, art, and ordinary people, however, concur, foolishly, in regarding the subjective aspect of dreaming as the more important element. An adult spends, on average, just under 2 hours of each night in dreaming. between a fifth and a quarter of the total night's sleep. This amounts to around 700 hours or nearly 1 month a year. Children, of course, spend considerably more of their longer sleeping time in dreaming, and adolescents too dream more than adults. In the process of their denial of the value of the dream as such, experimentalists point out how little our dreaming experience is recalled on waking, how rapidly even a remembered dream fades during the course of a day, so that by evening it has gone completely. Yeah, although you do remember some dream, I can still remember some dreams that happened when I was a child, and I can still recall all of the poignant elements of those dreams as an adult, whereas other dreams, they do just disappear, but some are really meaningful. They do actually stick around, and they're almost like an actual memory of your life. I had a funny dream actually the other night. I woke up from a funny dream actually, where I was stroking a dog's head in the dream, and I woke up and I was stroking my own chest with my thumb. Yes, we'll talk about what you're talking about in the chat at the end. I might mention it at the end. However, if the amount recalled of what is experienced is the criterion and the measure of importance, then our waking life must be very important indeed, since we do not remember it at all in its own terms when we are dreaming. When I am consciously awake, at least, I know that I do dream. A few of my dreams are even amongst my permanent memories, and occasionally an event in real life will remind me of a dream that I had years ago, and was unaware that I could remember until that moment. Yet, as stated, when I'm dreaming, I have no memory at all of the fact of my waking conscious life or normal consciousness in those terms. It is this last observation which forms a mainstay of the view that we have not one but two quite separate experiences of consciousness. Yeah, that's a very important part to remember, is that when you are asleep, when you're dreaming, you don't recall, you don't have the same recollection of daily life as you do when you're in your daily life. You can remember your dreams and parts of them, and you can tell someone about your dream, but in your dream you never recall something that happened that day in your everyday life, or you never say to somebody, hey, you never guess what happened to me today. You know, in your dream, you don't talk to somebody in your dream and say, you never guess what happened to me today. I met this person earlier on and they told me this. So which one's more important? Which one of these lives is more important? The one that you block out, or the one that you can always remember? These observations tell us also something about primacy. Primacy meaning that which comes first. Sleeping consciousness, it appears, precedes waking consciousness. We are here, of course, referring to evolutionary time, not time on the clock. The primacy of dreams in the everyday sense of time is not so undisputed. The dream is, after all, in part made up of snatches and fragments of the events and things perceived by waking consciousness in the previous few days. These certainly are distorted and garbled, but still recognisably and undeniably originating from our conscious perception. In Freudian terminology, this is the manifest dream. To avoid wasting time, let it be admitted at once that System B does have some kind of knowledge of System A and of ongoing reality. This has already in effect been admitted in an earlier chapter, where it was stated that some of the comments of the unconscious, legends and so forth, refer to consciousness. It is waking consciousness, as such, rather than the contents of waking consciousness, of which we are not aware in dreams. Yeah, there you go. The point is that none of the values and functions of the phenomena to which System A attaches value or importance are respected by System B. The use to which these objects are put is entirely capricious from System A's point of view. Not so from System B's point of view. On the contrary, the juxtapositions, linkings, inclusions and exclusions of the dream are extremely meaningful, as can be demonstrated. Since the question of the perception of each respective system by the other has come up, it is dealt with at this point. Each system perceives the other from outside. This phrase is meant on the one hand fairly literally, but it also means not in terms of the system which is being observed. There are reasons for not saying too much at this stage of how System B perceives System A, but what can be said, speaking generally, is that System B perceives System A, despite the latter's power to lay waste and destroy, with awe rather than fear and admiration rather than understanding. Okay, so there you go. System B perceives System A with awe rather than fear and admiration. So System B has awe and admiration for System A. When A perceives B, it sees nonsense, gibberish, chaos, silliness, madness, irrelevancy, illogicality, unnecessariness, and more of this kind. Such is essentially the experimental view of the Freudian view. It can be said also that the perception of System B is always unwelcome to System A. The latter will go out of its way to avoid the meeting, but where this is inevitable, prefers to kill first and then look. In a way, this reluctance and fear is not misplaced, since the sight or presence of System B may change a man beyond recognition, beyond the recognition even of himself. This view of System B is clearly quite different from the way we perceive, that is, experience the systems when we are in it, i.e. during dreaming or night consciousness. At this time, the dream is real, true, accepted, inevitable, and self-validating. This point that we perceive each system differently depending whether we are inside it or outside it tends to argue for the view of two distinct forms of consciousness, though the explanation of moving consciousness can also partly accommodate this. A further point of great importance is that both System A and System B, but more especially the latter, can function robotically, that is, in the absence of its own consciousness. This will be seen to constitute an argument again favouring the theory of moving consciousness, in that only one full consciousness can, or at any rate does, operate at any given time, even though both systems can be operating simultaneously. This fact, incidentally, may well be the source of the legends of zombies, robots, automata, and all creatures of diverse kinds without souls. N.A. Theory, I get the same recurring dream for years now. Yeah, that can be disturbing, can't it, when you get the same dream repeated over and over again, because there's obviously something in that dream that's meant to be recognized or sort of accepted or undertaken. Obviously not like literally, because dreams aren't ever literal, otherwise there would be loads of crazy stuff happening. But yeah, that's when you have a recurring dream, it's generally it's generally about something you have yet to address, let's say. That's the easiest way of saying it. So in the normal course of events, in the normal individual, when waking consciousness is present, sleeping consciousness is not, and vice versa, hence the fact that vampires sleep all day. But the experience that some other agency is in charge of us when we are relatively fully conscious is by no means uncommon. The compulsive gambler offers an instance of this. Many such individuals, telling of their condition, speak in these terms. I had won £50 or lost 300 or whatever and decided to stop playing, but I found myself, or saw myself, placing another bet, writing a cheque, etc., or in still more graphic terms. Someone went on placing bets using my hand and my money. One hears similar accounts from alcoholics. One sometimes hears not dissimilar accounts from people in love. It is, of course, possible to dismiss these reports as nothing more than a façon de parler, a manner of speaking. Anyone who imagines that it is only a manner of speaking, however, should try working with gamblers and alcoholics. Alternatively, we can ask ourselves what we mean by phrases like, I found myself picking up the phone and, or I promised myself I wouldn't go there again, but, or I honestly intended not to mention it, but, or I kept meaning to tell him, but, and so on. It would seem unnecessary to refer again here in detail to the results of sleep deprivation, stimulus deprivation, and drug addiction discussed in the previous chapter. In all these, more obviously in those cases just discussed, some other agency or alternative organisation, for organised it undoubtedly is, takes control in the presence of varying degrees of waking consciousness, sometimes with the initial agreement of consciousness, sometimes not. In the former category, one recalls how the vampire must first be invited in, how Faust must first voluntarily sign the contract with the devil. Once the initial step has been taken, however, consciousness is largely or entirely helpless, though still, in these cases, present. We have spoken of an alternating switch operating in such a way that both consciousnesses cannot be present at once. But as we have seen, the robot arousal or inducement of System B can take place in the presence of waking consciousness. It is functioning robotically at that point, in the sense that we are not it. We feel or sense its presence, but we are not the presence. However, it seems that if System B is aroused or released beyond a certain point, we, that is, waking consciousness, have no alternative but to move over out of System A into the other system. The switch mechanism seems to trip itself. At this point, we become it. We then are the presence, as in our night dreams or a deep trip. The sequence or process just outlined is very well described in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll first voluntarily makes and drinks the potion. As the transformation takes place, Jekyll, System A, consciousness, is gradually overcome and finally, at the end of the transformation, replaced by the alternative personality of Hyde, System B, the unconscious, who or which has full control until the potion wears off. Over a period and in course of many transformations, the conscious personality of Jekyll is weakened to such an extent that the unconscious Hyde can more or less order the conscious Jekyll to take the first step or bypass his resistance entirely. This is actually the end stage of possession, notably feared by the schizophrenic and the right-wing authoritarian personality alike. It is hard for the conscious personality to take any rehabilitative action at this point. Perhaps the most he can do is join Dr. Jekyll's Anonymous, where he can draw on the help of the ego structures of others. Ralph Hexham, was there just a mention of vampires? Interesting. Vampires, yeah. Blood sucking System B. The robotic function of System A is, in general, less dramatic. It is, however, a clear fact. For example, one's own name called out by another person is more likely to arouse one from sleep, be it orthodox or paradoxical, than a strange name called at the same volume. A wife who sleeps through her husband getting out of bed and banging his way to and from the bathroom will rouse at the muted cry of her baby in the next room. Similarly, a doctor may sleep undisturbed by revellers in the street outside, but not through the ringing of his own telephone. Here, obviously, the cortex is involved, monitoring stimuli from the external environment even during sleep. Possibly sleepwalking is a further dramatic instance of robotic cortical control, since sleepwalkers show no rapid eye movements and report no dreams on being wakened. This discussion has taken us a little away from the meaningfulness of dreams in their own terms, though not in those of waking consciousness. An important attribute of dreams is that their strangeness does not surprise us while we are asleep. This does not mean that we cannot be surprised in the course of a dream. The statement refers to the fact that while dreaming, we completely accept the bizarre nature of the dream and the strange use it makes of the everyday world. This is the Freudian dream work. In an earlier chapter, the analogy was proposed of an agency gaining admission to a control room in the absence of the rightful operators and messing about with the equipment and control gear stored there. A further explanatory analogy is that of children playing in a room full of lumber or bric-a-brac, the real or original purpose of which they do not understand, but which they now seize at random for the purposes of their own games. What an accurate description this also is, conversely, of the activities of the experimental psychologist in respect of, say, literature. An adult might be surprised or amused or horrified to find the children in this hypothetical lumber room using a piece of brocade as a floor cloth, a dressing table as a pirate ship, or a gramophone as an oven. To the children, there is nothing unacceptable in their actions or assumptions. So it is with the dream work. Thus, at the time, it is perfectly in order to dream that one's wife is not one's wife, but one's mother's sister, or that cars are driven by porridge, or that women have wings that enable them to fly. Only on waking do we say, what a strange dream. Occasionally, it happens that a dream straightforwardly reveals to us something important, makes us aware of a situation we had overlooked, or directs attention to a problem. But as a rule, the events of the dream seem on waking meaningless, and the inclusion and exclusions unimportant. Later on, in a couple of his other books, Gooch goes into, so I think it's really from The Paranormal, which was a book from 1979, which was really that sort of brought Gooch into general awareness, really, because it was quite a concise book on the paranormal, where he went into a lot, because as well as doing all of the early psychology stuff that he'd done of working with children and writing books, psychology books and stuff like that, he also was a trance medium. So he used to do channeling as a young man, and used to write all of his books in a trance. So he used to put a pen in his hand and start writing, and then at the end of the day would edit all of his work. And so it basically just, once he'd read enough what he considered material for the book, he then would start writing the book, and the words would just sort of come out, and the references would all be there, and then he would go back and check the references later on, because he also was like a speed reader, so he used to read about 3 books a day, so he was very, very, very well read, and had, as well as being a scientifically minded person, was also a medium. But he didn't believe in disembodied spirits and stuff like that, coming through him. I think he was fully aware that this was all just something that he could do, and it was a way of the mind taking over, the system B taking over, and all the rest of it. So from the paranormal onwards, he does go into, let's think, there's like a sort of crossover point where he goes from the scientific stuff into the more sort of Neanderthal side of things, and that's the paranormal side. So he was interested in the paranormal because he believed that was the Neanderthal man's mind was what we would think of as the paranormal now. So System B turns into this sort of paranormal mind. So the book, The Paranormal, and then later on there's Secret Life of Humans, and one other book, but they're more investigations into the paranormal, into psychic powers, all the rest of it. And he goes into dreams quite a lot in one of those books, and about predictive dreams. And how some people do actually dream the future. There's plenty of examples, and as with all of this stuff, there is thousands of examples of the paranormal at work, but the System A structure of science just dismisses all of it. Even though there has been, for the last 100 years, there's been thousands of reported, scientifically verified reports of paranormal activity, not like, ghosts or whatever, but telepathy, the sense of being stared at, communication with animals, communication with plants, dreams, predictive dreams, all sorts of stuff. But it's just because of the nature of the system that we have in the West, well, in everywhere really, is that, you know, part of that, the nature of that system is that it is very system A, and so it dismisses anything that's system B. Not that the more Neanderthal people in the world are any better with all this stuff, but you know, they do at least still acknowledge that some of it exists. A good book I read recently to do with all that was what's it called? Prometheus, Atlas and Prometheus by Jason Reza Georgiani. So he sort of touches on some quite sort of Gooch topics in that book as well, which is another person I'd like to do an interview with, really. Maybe I'll have to start it off by having an argument with him on Twitter as well. Maybe that's the best way to get him on, get on his radar. Okay, so it appears, however, that the dream itself knows that these are important. So this is about the events that happen in a dream. This is a strange turn of phrase, the full implications of which must be avoided for the moment. One thing is, however, clear, that the dream is in charge of us, not we of it. Clearly also, the meaningful functioning of the nervous system and our consciousness of it are not the same thing. The belief that they are, or must be, the same thing is firmly argued by experimental psychology, and arises from the fact that in the state of waking consciousness, what happens, what we do and what we experience, and the conscious awareness of what happens, enjoy a large measure of accord. I suggest, however, that in the waking state, our consciousness so closely shadows the activities of the cortex, our movements and perceptions, that they can readily be confused as being one and the same thing. Only at certain rare moments do most of us experience the dissociation of consciousness from the activity of the cortex, but there can be no doubt that this occurs. In dream life, the dissociation of or volitional consciousness and what happens to us or with us is the rule. That is, in dreams, it is all happening without us. Instead of consciousness directing operations as it apparently does and perhaps often really does in the waking condition, during night consciousness, the operations are clearly directing us. As already established, System B can obtrude into waking life, both in abnormal and normal states. Were this latter fact not so, there would be, for instance, to say nothing of Freudian slips, no such phenomenon as normal religion, since the intellect does not need this and would indeed not be capable of producing it. The natural condition of System A is atheism, i.e. neither for religion nor against it, but outside it. As said, were there no such thing as System B, and were it not able to both reach and to perceive consciousness, the accounting for the evolution of an earth religion into a sky religion and for many other factors considered later would be very difficult. The obtrusion of System B into System A, consciousness, may be resisted or not resisted, recognised or not recognised. The communist does not recognise it, though he suffers it. In religion, it is recognised, though not really for what it is, and joyfully accepted. The forms of System B, both as itself in its own domain or as the ghost of System A, are varied, almost infinitely so. In this connection, the phrase is apposite. In my Father's house are many mansions. The product of System B is knowledge 2. The description and definition with examples of knowledge 2 is the concern of a subsequent chapter. Dreams are one form of this knowledge, Christianity another. Knowledge 1 has a single form, knowledge 2 has many. This is one further way in which it can be seen that the attributes of the two systems are always opposed. A rather different aspect of the matter is now, however, considered or reconsidered, the physiological. The many deductions made throughout this book on the basis of certain psychological evidence and the mental junk of past eras and civilizations are here dramatically borne out in physiological terms. Right, so that's the end. That's the end of chapter 7. And then we're going to... The next one will be chapter 8. I think I think we can leave it there until next week, because chapter 8, it's probably not worth starting just like 5 minutes of it, because it is quite a big chapter, and we're going to get into like the sort of physiological evidence, and this is really looking over it. Yeah, it's quite a lot here. It's probably like chapter 6. It's going to be like a massive chapter, and it's all about, it's really big actually. That is 241, 278. It's probably about 30 pages or something, and that will be more about the cerebellum and the cerebrum, which is again going to be very fascinating. So yeah, we'll leave it there. That's the end of chapter 7. Not bad, very short chapter. So what we've got in the chat, Weltgeist Zuf Ferde just read the parts of the argument Robert did not delete. He shows traits of narcissism. Trevon Wright, hey, hello Trevon. The only way out is in. I have synchronicity all the time now after purifying the mind. Excellent. Yeah, synchronicity. There's so much in this book. Synchronicity comes in for. Actually, it might be the next. Oh, let's have. Is it in here? The ancient adversary. Anyway, Gooch was a massive advocate of the I Ching, as was Jung, obviously. Gooch probably makes as good a defense for the I Ching as anyone I've ever read. If you've never used the I Ching, it's a fascinating book, because you're in Gooch's terms, you're basically creating the most by throwing the coins. You're creating the most random reading that they could possibly think of, 3,000 years ago. And so you sort of, by throwing these coins, you're then creating these hexagrams, and then you look back through the book at the hexagrams, and then you have different changing lines depending on what numbers you threw and all this stuff. And you get some fascinating readings. And I've spent hours, days, weeks, months. I've looked for houses. I've found, businesses, all sorts of things in there. People, you've worked out what people are like through using it, asking questions. Sometimes it tells you to shut up. If you ask the same thing over and over again, you're not meant to ask the same thing over and over again, but if you do, it tells you to shut up or stop asking or go and look back again at the readings. It's good. It's not, obviously there's an element of fun to it as well. The only way out is in. My synchronicity comment was about the paranormal evidence he spoke of, even though Sister May denies or ignores it. Yeah, but that's what I was getting. I was just getting round to that, right? That the synchronicity and the I Ching, there's like a big tie-in between those two things. So I think it's it's either the next book or which is Personality and Evolution, which is much more dense. It's either in that book that Stan goes over the I Ching, or it's in the Double Helix of the Mind. It might be Double Helix of the Mind, which is the fourth book. What I'll probably do is I'm going to attempt to read the first 3 books like this, so that we've got the first 3 books out of the way, because the first 3 books are the sort of up to the Neanderthal question, the last of the first 3 books. So there's like a trilogy of books, which are all they're all basically the same book, you know, but each one fleshes out a little bit more. So the first one is Total Man, which is where he's attempting to pull together what we. I mean, the thing with Total Man and with what Stan attempted to do. So at the time, Stan met a book agent, and the book agent said to him, you know, there was 3 of them in their group. So they had a group of people that used to all meet up every Saturday in Swiss Cottage. And out of that group, 3 of them were talented writers, let's say, and they met an agent, for a literary agent, and then he said he could get them all book deals. So he managed to get 3 of them book deals. And when it came to, you know, Stan's work, his idea was to try and put a sort of marker on where man was, where humanity had got to at this point in time, 1970. So take a sample of every field of man's interest and add them together and just try and work out where we're really going. So where we're moving towards in terms of conscious evolution. It's very much a late 60s thing. You know, where we were going, where we were going to evolve to. And were we going to evolve? Was there going to be some kind of return to the garden, or, you know, a move forward out of the way that humans had previously been, and all this stuff. Looking back, obviously, we see it as the Cultural Revolution. That's what was happening. There was a cultural revolution. Someone was pushing this idea of there having to be a revolution in culture. They was going to have to change everything. He was going to have to get women in the workplace and make them more like men, and then tear apart families, and, you know, so that the Cultural Revolution was on the horizon. But Stan's idea was to try and get a sampling of where we were at the time. But what he ended up actually doing was starting at this point and then working his way all the way down to this point, which is the point of our origin, which is when he concluded by the Neanderthal question. He concludes that, oh, well, we're a hybrid. That's why we're like this. That's why we've got these 2 opposing systems within us that can never exist at the same time. Is that they created us. They make us what we are, human. In that, like, we have this sort of like what you call a dynamic of creation or creativity. So you've got this pushing and pulling in the mind that's what makes humans creative. That's what makes humans stand out from everybody else, is that we've got this dynamic and internal to-ing and fro-ing. That's you know, like the yin yang symbol. You've got each one contained within the other, a little piece of the other. So you can't ever tear them apart completely, because they both contain each other. But within that dynamic, you have the sort of creativity of humans, and then, you know, you have this explosion of creativity from a certain point in time, which Stan understood to be the hybrid event. So he was actually, instead of starting at a point of you know, I've got this idea and I want to work forward and prove my theory, he actually started from the point of, I don't know anything, and let's sort of work our way back and distill the facts that we've got until we can find like a common point. So I think that's what's fascinating about him, really, is that he didn't really have an idea of where he wanted to go. He just had an idea of trying to find out where we were going, and ended up finding out where we'd come from instead. And so this was a sort of basis of the conversation I'd had with Robert Seffer on Twitter. And so he was he was trying to. He was arguing with a lot of people on there, actually, and he can be quite arrogant in the way that he talks to people, because he's obviously the number one dissident. No, what did he say? The number one outlaw anthropologist, or whatever he calls it. And so he was saying that Jews are white people, and a lot of people were obviously taking umbrage with it. And I put up a picture of some Israeli women and said, "Look at these smoking hot white women." And he retweeted that to his followers, and they obviously, smelling blood, they all started attacking me, and one of them then he then retweeted it and said, "Oh, you're from the UK. In 50 years' time, when your children have been raped by children called Muhammad or something like this, can I put pictures of your children up and say, oh, look at these English people or something?" And people were laughing, retweeting that. What a dickhead! What a cunt! All this stuff. And then one person went to my YouTube channel and said, "Oh, look, Robert, he's got a YouTube channel. I've just listened to him. What a boring cunt." And I said, actually, I think Robert would probably like my channel. All I talk about is hybrid origin theory, which I know Robert's big on. If you've read his books, Species with Amnesia, it's very Stan Gooch's work. And, I've written to him before about this, but he's never got back to me. He doesn't really reply to people. And he said, "Oh, okay, well, I'll have a look at it then." And then I noticed that these people started deleting their tweets about me, because they obviously thought, oh, our leader doesn't mind this person or whatever. And then someone said, "But he's not wrong, because in 50 years' time, your country is going to be 35% Muslim." And I replied, "Oh, well, it doesn't matter. I don't really think that demographics are that important. After all, Jews are only 2% of the population, of the global population, and they seem to be doing quite well." And he said, "Yes, they are doing rather well." He retweeted that and said, "Yes, they are doing rather well. But what do you think they done? Stole all of the Caucasians' ideas off of them," or something like that. And then I replied, "No, it's just the difference is that Jews have got a higher admixture of Neanderthal than the rest of the Europeans. So it's not that they're not European, they've just got a higher admixture of Neanderthal." And then he replied, "Oh, I'm sick of trolls like you. You don't tell me about this stuff. I tell you about this stuff. I'm the anthropologist. You just sit there, listen to me, and if you don't like it, blah blah blah." And I said, "Well, I'm not coming in bad faith at all. I'm an honest person. I've got a good teacher. Stan Gooch proposed that man was a hybrid back in 1972, and I only really listen to or work with dissidents and outsiders." Which is true. I've always been a dissident outsider. I've always read dissident outsiders' work. That's how I got to know Stan, because he was a dissident outsider. And then I think that he must have realised that maybe that he's talking to somebody who probably wasn't a troll, or somebody who didn't know, basically, I think he realised that I had a piece of information that it's possible that he didn't have or he'd never heard of, because Stan isn't a very well-known researcher, especially in America. So he just said, "Oh, well, I'm sorry, I've had a lot of trolls all day, and I'll check out your channel anyway. And then he went and deleted all of his tweets. So, and that was the end of that, really. So yeah, you know, I'd like to speak to Robert Sefer anyway. Like I say, I've written to. I like his work. I respect him. It's just that you can't. He's very, very intellectual. Okay, so he's academic. So he's been brought up in a system of academics. So he's not really willing to think outside the box or look outside the box, or he's not very well versed in, you know, outside the box work, or, you know, the idea of being a dissident or being an outsider. He's had to fit into a system. He's had to work within a system. And it's only recently that he seems to have sort of gone outside of this system. So he's very young. He's a young man he's just young on his journey. So, you know, but I would like to speak to him at some point. So if anyone out there is listening, can put the feelers in. I picked up about 15 new followers from it anyway, on both YouTube and Twitter. So welcome new followers if you've come to me from Robert Sefer. I guarantee if you're into Robert Sefer's work, you won't be disappointed in Stan Gooch, because Robert Sefer did say anything from 1972 isn't worth a fig these days, because there's been so much a revolution in genetic blah 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 since then, or something like that. But that stuff don't mean anything to me. I still don't really believe that the genetic data is what they say it is. I personally don't believe that what they're reading in the DNA is actually what's really there. For one, okay, they talk about, when they talk about a Neanderthal, when I talk about Neanderthal, when Stan Gooch talks about Neanderthals, I'm talking about the whole line of Africa, that everything that came from Africa, everything that's still in Africa, not necessarily the people that are in Africa now, because that's like there's a different admixture going on there. But the line of fossils and skulls coming out of Africa all share lots of similar traits. They haven't got a chin. They've got like a recessive chin. They've got a sloping forehead. Very, very little frontal cortex because of the sloping forehead. They've got a large eyebrow ridge, and they've got an occipital bun at the back of their head. That's hands down the model for skulls out of Africa from, if you believe the fossil record, going back millions of years. We still find that in Neanderthal man, and Neanderthal man existed in what they call Neanderthal man is actually what you call classical Neanderthal. So there's two types of Neanderthal. There's like a Middle Eastern Neanderthal, and then there's the European Neanderthal, who was cold weather adapted, so it had a larger chest cavity, a larger nose. So it's a particular type of Neanderthal. So most people, when they talk about Neanderthals, so if you look at the DNA evidence, when they say that humans contain 3% of Neanderthal, they're actually only talking about classical Neanderthal. Okay, so we haven't got any genetic material from the African line that Neanderthal came from. So there's no way of examining the DNA in humans today and in Africans and Asians and everyone else, and saying that they contain DNA from the same place that the pre to Neanderthal, the classical European Neanderthal. So there's no way of showing that. So all they can show is the DNA from classical Neanderthal, who evolved in Europe he was there for about 500,000 years in the cold, and had obviously gone through lots of adaptations and changes, and that's the DNA that they sequenced. So there's no way of really telling what we share, or what that Neanderthal gave us that is still in us and is in Africans as well, and is DNA from the Neanderthaloids that came from Africa with the sloping forehead and all the rest of it. So I don't even think they're reading the data properly. And I know it sounds like, you know, who am I to say that they're not reading the data properly? But these are the same people that are telling you that these are the same people that are telling you that anyone can be a man, that anyone can be a woman, that there's no such thing as gender, that there's no such thing as race. You know, these are the same people telling you this stuff, are the same people telling you that there's only 3% Neanderthal in Europeans and there's none in Africa, which bollocks. I've seen some recent stuff where they're saying that actually Africans contain more Neanderthal than they're saying they do, and all this other stuff. So it's still, you know, we're going back to 2009, going back to 1972 when Stan wrote Total Man, and 1975 when he wrote The Neanderthal Question. They laughed him out of the establishment. Oh, how ridiculous. There's no way that we're a hybrid. There's no way we're related to Neanderthal man. 2010, we're related to Neanderthal man. We're a hybrid. So even in that period of time, things can change dramatically. So I think it's still too early to make statements like we only contain 3% Neanderthal, because we still haven't got all the data in. And that's without going into the other research that shows that Europeans are the last race to have evolved on Earth. I've got a whole nother reason why that would be. And again, they're reading that wrong. They're saying we're the last, so we're the youngest race of people. So we evolved the last, which means we turned white the last. No, I'm going to that another time. So in the chat, Ralph Hexham, he drives a Tesla. Yeah, there you go. Veltgeist, are you aware that both you and Stan Gooch are ISTJs? What is that the Myers-Briggs thing? Is that what you're on about, ISTJs? The only way out is in. How did you figure out what he was? I thought you had to answer questions about yourself. You're in a life as well. The only way out is in. Mainstream science anthropology knows nothing about the purpose of DNA even. Plasma physics reveals that. Oh, that's your Dan Winters stuff. Plasma physics, DNA thing. Yeah. That's maybe I should even interview him at some point. Ralph Hexham, work your social media accounts a bit more. Yeah. It's hard though, because I feel like I'm sort of on some sort of ban list on social media. I don't know why. Maybe because I do spend a lot of time trolling people rather than engaging in conversations. Because to me, most of the conversation's already done, or the stuff that I've got to say, you can't say in those in small, in 280 characters. So I'd rather interview somebody, which I will get round to doing, or that's probably the best way for me. Veltgeist, the only way out is in. You can figure it out if you're familiar with the cognitive functions. I actually come up as a ENFJ or something. I've done it. I've done them over and over again. I'm not actually a fan of the Myers-Briggs thing. I think it's just sort of similar to like the zodiac thing. I think it's astrology for atheists. So whereas I respect people who are into that sort of stuff, that's all right, and whatever it takes to get you through life. But I've come up as, depending on how I'm feeling on that day, I've come up as either an introvert or an extrovert. But we'll touch on introversion and extroversion at some point in one of the other books. I think that might also be Double Helix in the Mind, of where introversion and extroversion originates. People don't like People don't like my opinions on astrology. They don't like my opinions on the Myers-Briggs thing. What else we got? Trevor Wright, is Judaism and Zionism interconnected because of history of origin in the Bible? I'm not like a massive expert on these sorts of things like Judaism and Zionism as like separate subjects. I mean, as part of the people that create these things, and they're obviously creations of the human mind. They're not. There's nothing to say they've come down from God as such. But the idea is of Judaism and Zionism as being, something for a chosen group of people. If you consider that, if you can consider the proposal that Gooch makes that Neanderthals, that Jews have more Neanderthal than the rest of Europeans, and that's what makes them stand apart. And that Neanderthals are a sort of more collectivist and religious, spiritual, mystical group of people that Cro-Magnon was the outsider, then they would consider themselves chosen people. And if you read Kevin MacDonald, Cultural Critique, the first chapter of that just is basically a load of quotes where it's lots of quotes about from different Jewish organizations, Jewish individuals, where he shows that they consider themselves to be some kind of separate species or separate race to the rest of humanity. Make of that what you will. This is another thing I said to Robert Sephra. If Jews want to call themselves, make themselves as a separate race and a separate to white people, then I'm not going to argue with them. That's up to them. They're entirely free to choose what they want to be. Who are we to tell them that they want to be something? That's like telling black people they're not black, or like telling Chinese people they're not Chinese. If they want to identify as Chinese and they look Chinese, then go for it. It's not really harming me. It only harms me when people identify as me and they're not, obviously not me. Unless they're willing to give up everything that they considered them before and become me, then part of my group, then okay. But the moment you slip up and you show that you're not one of my group, then you shouldn't really be identifying as that group. So if they want to consider themselves chosen people, we can only look at reasons why they may say something like that. And I think that Gooch's work gives as good a explanation as any as to why that might be. If they are more Neanderthal, and that's what they're testing for in places like Israel, the markers, Neanderthal markers in the DNA, then yeah, go for it. The test is not the system. No, I know, but as I say, I've come up different on different. I do the test I've done it over and over again since I was about 16. Every few years I do the Myers-Briggs thing, and then it always comes up a little bit different. So unless my personality has changed that much, then and then you've said I'm an ISTJ, so I've never had that one come up. Yeah. Admittedly, it's more complicated than astrology, except for when you get into proper astrology, and then that starts getting really complicated as well, and they can tie you into all sorts of knots. But anyway, thanks everybody for coming along and joining in the chat and with your questions and all the rest of it. Sorry it's gone on a bit long tonight, so it's been an extra sort of 10 minutes or something. But yeah, thanks for listening and taking notice and sharing if you're sharing, and commenting if you're commenting, and liking if you're liking. And yeah, thanks to everyone in the chat: Voltgeist, Zub Ferde, Ralph Hexam, Trevorn. The only way out is in. Yeah, so I'm gonna get out of here and go to sleep. So I suggest that you all do the same. It's Monday night, so we should be able to get a good bit of System B time in. Oh, who was there? NA Theory or something. Was you still there? NA Theory, yeah. Okay, so see you all next week, if not on the social networks before then. If you see me arguing with anybody, stick up for me. Thank you very much. Bye bye.